Good morning. Thank you, Norm, for inviting me to be part of this conference. What I'll be talking about this morning is a software called the Power BI, a Microsoft product that's been out just a few years. And I'll be sharing some of the experiences that I've had over the course of the last year and a half of trying to learn this technology and seeing how I might be able to bring it into some of the consulting efforts that I'm part of. So what is Power BI? As I mentioned, Power BI is a software developed by Microsoft back in 2015. We've all heard of business intelligence or data analytics. This is one of the solutions Microsoft is offering as an answer to business intelligence. So what is data analytics? We all like to be able to analyze raw data to make conclusions. Power BI is great at, as you can see in that visual, Power BI is great at displaying graphical or text data in a variety of ways and interactions. We'll get into some of those later on. The other component of the other piece of the data analytics is it allows for automation. There's ways that we can go out and pull data from various sources and then create scripts or automate how we retrieve data, how we transform that data, and how we view that data. So a lot of this effort, once it's developed, it can be easily repeated. So as I mentioned, Power BI has been out just, the program itself has only been out maybe 4 or 5 years. But how many of you are familiar with Power Pivot that's part of Excel? It's an add-on that came out back in 2010. And if many of you followed Bill Jelen, 10 years ago, he mentioned that this is the best feature that has happened to Excel in 20 years. I just remember reading about it. In fact, I even bought a book or two on it. But at the time, it just seemed complicated and hard. I kind of got the impression it was for the hard tech IT people. And I wish I had spent more time on it back then, because there is a lot of potential and a lot of power behind some of the features of Power Pivot. So if you've already kind of have a feel for what Power Pivot is, you're a long ways down the road into what Power BI can do for you. So let's go through, I think this is about a 6-minute video put on by a guy in a cube, a couple Microsoft employees, and they do a very good job of they put together 2 or 3 videos a week, just talking about different aspects of Power BI, how people are using it. Well, anyway, here's a video that came out a couple of years ago of just a basic introduction, and I think it's a good way to kind of get our feet wet as we get started this morning.
Yo, Adam Saxon here with Guy in a Cube, and in this video we're going to look at what is Power BI. It's coming up. If it's your first time finding Guy in a Cube, be sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the videos from both Patrick and myself. Patrick and I have been to lots of conferences, we talk with customers all the time, and one question we tend to get sometimes when people haven't been really introduced to Power BI is they see all the cool stuff that Power BI has to offer, but they don't really know what it is, or like, where do I even get started? So I wanted to talk about what Power BI is in this video to help those that may not know. And really what it comes down to is Power BI is a visualization tool to help you create stunning reports and dashboards to help you gain insights into your business, and really to help you make business decisions. We all make decisions every day, and some people make bad decisions. But what we want to do is make the right business decisions, and Power BI can really help you do that. And in order to make the right visualizations, to make those business decisions, we need data. Not that data, we need business data. And business data can come from all over. It can come from Excel files, Remember the old Excel hell? Yeah, it still exists. So you may have Excel files scattered all about. You may have a centralized data warehouse that you can pull data from. You may have unstructured data. Maybe you're taking advantage of Cosmos DB, or you've got some blogs or videos, or maybe there's images out there that you need to go catalog. Data can come from all types of places. The whole mantra of Power BI is that you can connect to that data regardless of what it is and pull that data into Power BI to visualize items on top of it. Power BI is actually broken up into a couple of different pieces, and it's good to understand what these components are. The first is Power BI Desktop. I did a video not too long ago about how to get up to speed with Power BI Desktop in 5 easy steps. So you can go check out that video if you haven't looked at it yet. You can also download Power BI Desktop for free at powerbi.com. So that's right, it's free. You can just start using Power BI today with no cost and get up and running, kick the tires a little bit, and see what it can do for you in terms of working with data and creating those visualizations. Then we have the Power BI service. This is a cloud service in the Microsoft cloud offerings. And really the point of the service is to really drive and enable sharing and collaboration. So this is a concept either within your organization or outside of your organization. You can have groups of people and share those dashboards, reports out to who needs to see it, and allow it to be relevant to those folks. We also offer the Power BI mobile app. So this lets you do things on your phone, your tablet, other types of devices where you may not be at your desktop and you want to be able to see those reports and dashboards, and also allows you to do things like annotation and setting alerts, things of that nature. So you can do that right from your phone. You may have also heard about Power BI Premium. This is an addition onto our Power BI Pro offering, and really this is for large enterprises. This allows you to do all sorts of things that may enable you to work on larger data sets and also offer some additional features inside of the service. So that's available for you as well. Okay, so now that we know what Power BI is, what's the average flow for someone that's using Power BI? The very first thing you have to do is you have to get some data, right? And then create those visualizations on top of the data. And where do you start to do that? You can do that with Power BI Desktop. So the first thing you're going to want to do is get Power BI Desktop and use that to pull in your data, create your report, and visualize your data. There are ways that you can do this inside of the Power BI service, but if you just want to do this on your desktop and do it for free, you can just use Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop will offer the most functionality for you. Once you've created that report, the next thing you're going to want to do is publish that to the Power BI service. So you're going to take that report that you created on your desktop, you're going to publish that into the cloud, and it will be inside of the Power BI service. This may or may not mean that your data is going to the cloud. So there's different ways that you can handle data, and you can refer to the documentation in terms of what those differences are. I'm not going to cover that in this video, but you can publish that report to the service. At that point, you can create dashboards inside of the service as well. So dashboards can be a collection of items or visualizations from different reports that you've created. So these could be reports against maybe some, data that's in SQL Server. It could be data that's in Oracle. It could be data from Salesforce. And all these different reports, you may have these in your organization. You can combine those into a single dashboard to gain insights from. Now that you've created your dashboard, you've published your report to the Power BI service, the next thing is sharing and collaboration. So you can share those reports and dashboards with people either inside of your organization or external to your organization. You can also share those reports with folks that maybe just have a Gmail address or Hotmail or Outlook.com. They may not have an actual organizational email to share to, so you can do that now. And it's as easy as that. We just create our reports inside of Power BI Desktop, publish them to the service, and then share it out to the folks that need to know the information. To get started, all you have to do is head over to powerbi.com. There you can download Power BI Desktop for free, and you can also sign up for the Power BI Cloud service for free as well, and give it a try. I'll also have a link down in the description below to the Power BI blog where you can stay up to date on a lot of the announcements that we're making on the product and see what's coming. All right, what do you think? Did this help you understand what Power BI is? If you have more questions about what it is, go ahead and leave that down in the comments below and we will go ahead and answer that for you. If you like this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button or smash it if you so desire. If it's your first time here, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the videos from both Patrick and myself. And as always, from both of us, thanks so much for watching. Keep being awesome, and we'll see you in the next video.
So I would encourage, if you have interest in Power BI, to dig into some of the Guide to Cube videos. They put out several a week, and very informative, and just like what you saw, just high level, and kind of gives you a feel and flavor for what the product will provide. So moving on, the goal for the next 3 hours. Got all morning planned. Hopefully we be done by noon. But the thought process, what we was wanting to do is spend about 2 hours just kind of go through some basic introductions and examples. And I think it's important to see the end result first. That way we kind of know what we're driving for. And then the second hour, we will kind of get in the details of, definitions and how we're making this all come together. Then the third hour, get a little more technical and do a deep dive into some closeout reporting. We're all familiar with FBS's Smart Feeder User Defined Report, group reports. Well, I've got some data there, and hopefully take that data and end up with a dashboard at the end of an hour. It'd be a very fast-paced and high level, but just kind of give everybody a feel for how the system works and what it takes to pull everything together. And then finally, hopefully we'll have 20, 30 minutes at the end to kind of go through the next steps for your organization, for MASA, and then for myself. So we got a full hour ahead of us. So I just want to thank the group that I've been working with. They've obviously, this is real data, live financial data, and we understand. I understand the importance of confidentiality, and so this group has allowed me to show their data, but most of it's going to be fast and blurred out. But I think it'll be sufficient enough to for you to get the point. And if needed, I can play some of the videos twice to kind of get the feel for how the system works. And then, out of respect, I ask that you don't record. I know Norm is in the process of recording, and if we say something that that's more confidential, Norm has agreed to edit that out before anything is released. And also, just like to thank the staff that I'm working with. This has been a very trying process, and all of these ladies and Randy have been very helpful and patient as we've gone through this process over the last year or so. So let's move forward. So as I've been working with this organization, probably close to 15 years, 8 or 10 years ago, I was approached, how do we analyze a entity, a trucking entity, that the data is all inside QuickBooks or other non-FBS data. So the questions that was asked 8 or 10 years ago is, what rates should we be charging internally? How do we charge based on miles, trip miles? And all this effort had been done in Excel, and everybody can imagine, as you get 4 or 5 years of Excel data and you start changing things, the spreadsheet just became cumbersome to manage. And I knew there had to be a better way. So I started digging around in some of these data analytic tools, and I started off with Tableau. And I'd worked with Tableau probably 10 years ago a little bit, and I knew it was very powerful. But as I was playing with it, I just struggled getting the data in the format that was needed. It was the same problem I've always had with Tableau. So this particular client suggested I try Power BI. He had seen a presentation from a consultant that he uses. So I went down the Power BI road. I tried it out and soon realized how simple it was to connect to Excel, how simple it was to manipulate and kind of start extracting data, making sense of it. And then in that whole process, I realized to answer the questions that this group is asking, what rates should we be charging? What's the service profitability of these different services within this entity? That I needed to somehow mimic the FBS cost allocation process, where we look at our costs, need to get to a cost per mile and then allocate those miles out to the various services. So this was my first attempt with Power BI. I want to go back to this Tableau comment. When I was playing with Tableau, there was just some things that I didn't realize that was available, that Power BI, I found that I immediately noticed in Power BI. So as I look back, I don't know if Power BI or Tableau is a better product, but Tableau does have some of the data manipulation tools that Power BI does. I just didn't realize it at the time. So getting started looking at this entity, again, the data sources, the financial information was in QuickBooks. Excellent use of classes. Classes was split between types of services, which is basically, types of trailers, hopper, live bottom. And then within those broader services, kind of split it down between local or long distance hauling. Under the resources, we had individual tractors and then individual trailer types. Then all of the miles and fuel logs were either found in Microsoft Access or Excel. So one of my first challenges was to pull in data from QuickBooks via Excel and these mileage logs from fuel and from Access and Excel. So being able to pull all those data sources into a single data model was my first task. So this is a dashboard that we came up with, and for those that were at the conference last year, this was what we presented. Just a basic dashboard. We have year-to-date information, year-to-date margin, year-to-date repairs, receivables, and then we have a navigation options. These items down here, the balance sheet, income statement, you can just click on those and it'll take you to those specific pages. So first thing I want to focus on is our resource cost, how to answer those questions of what rates we should be charging. We first need to know our costs. So this was one of our first reports that we came up with. Basically, can you guys see my cursor as I move it? So basically going across, we have years, and then for each years we have dollars, and then dollars per mile. And in this case, the dollars per mile is based on our, in this case, it's based on miles at the resource level. It's based on miles. So we can see what our average cost was for this group of tractors for the last 4 or 5 years. So we talked about the S2s and S1 concept yesterday. In this example, all the S2 would be the major grouping of trailer types or the tractor. So all the hoppers or all the live bottoms. Then down here would be the S1s. In this case, all the tractors. So as I play this video, what I'm going to show is how we can use these slicers to toggle back and forth between resource types and then look at individual groups. So I got to figure out. So here I'm going to select the tractor and go down to the Kenworth, select it. You can see the visual changes to reflect those new slicers. Live bottom, we can see the individual live bottom and pull up the individual costs for those particular groups of tractors or resources. So that kind of gives you a flavor of some of the capabilities of the reporting once you have the data grouped correctly. So moving to the next slide, once we knew our cost per mile for the different resources, we needed to allocate those costs out to the different services. And in this case, we're looking at a hopper service, and the allocation process works the same as the standard costing in FBS. So in this case, there's X number of dollars that was posted from the hopper group, which ended up being 2 cents per hundredweight for this particular year. So we were able to, maybe so what this is showing us is our allocation out of the resource groups into the service groups. And yesterday we talked about the S1 and S2 centers. In my mind, when I say an resource group, that would be the equivalent of an S center in FBS. So once we were able to come up with the allocations, we wanted to see just the profitability by these different services. And going down by row here, those would be our broader classifications of services. So like under Hopper services, we could break that down into further detail, some internal hauling, some local hauling, just different ways of distance haul. Mainly these sub-services are distance related. Under live bottom, we could look at cobs or shucks or green ear corn, and we could see what the net margin was for each of these services. And then at the bottom, that net margin across for 2016 would equal the net margin for the entity. So it's finally a way that I could start ensuring, number one, that everything was correct. It ties out to the entity income statement, but also see the components of net margin within that entity. It was just a quick way of seeing what was working and what wasn't, what an area that we needed to focus on or did that was working. So as usual, when I go out and work with this group, the real world comes to life. And again, when I was out there in July, a month or so ago, we sat down at the table, and these are the kinds of questions that were asking me. What service rates should we be charging as we come into the harvest season? What will our year-end margin be by service? In other words, taking what we've already have, year to date, plus a forecasted. What will that be by service? What will our cash flow requirements be? Will we have any change in working capital? What will our year-end profitability be? And as I was sitting there and driving home, I was thinking, how do I answer these questions, especially easily? We could go down the spreadsheet route again, and have a magnitude of 14 or 15 linked spreadsheets. I was just struggling with how he was going to consolidate and answer this question quickly and easily. So here again, as I was driving home, I just remember telling myself, I got into Power BI to try to simplify my life and avoid all the spreadsheets and the linkages that we have. And here we are going back down that same trail again. Well, as I was thinking about it and then working with Emmy, we came up with some, let's try to use the data that we have to simplify how we would project out our net margins. So we know that variable cost, and we knew our variable and fixed costs, and based on some crop plans, we knew our expected tons and miles, and then we estimated, the percent of those, the percent of the time that those miles would be driven. And from that, with some of these assumptions, we were able to pull together a summary spreadsheet that was able to help us look at year-to-date numbers plus the August through December numbers forecasted, and tie them all into the same spreadsheet. But the magical part about all of this is our ability to link back into Power BI and pull in some of the numbers that we just saw on the reports. So let me play that video. Let's just show you how it goes out and refreshes. So right now we're looking at just forecasted units. I'm going to refresh. So this is going out into the Power BI service and pulling in, the various service level detail numbers. So this process will take 8 or 10 seconds. So what we have here is an updated. So what we have here is an updated, forecasted report, pulling in year-to-date actuals plus our forecast to come up with a net margin over here at the end of the year. And then by getting to that point, we were able to build a forecasted balance sheet. The point is I think now that we have this process in place, I'm hoping that keeping these forecasts and updates should be a fairly minimal effort. And Emmy, if you're online, if you're available, by having this automated, how much time do you think this will save in some of the things that you were trying to do manually?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. It'll definitely save a lot of time. Like you said, you have it set up for month end, so at the end of the month, I can just go in, and if I have my forecasted billable units for each month, and if that needs to be adjusted, I can do that. But then all the year-to-date numbers, like you said, will automatically pull in, so that's going to make the continual updating of it very smooth, and won't take a lot of time at all.
Yep. Thank you, Amy. So I see that as one of the big benefits of some of the time that we've taken to get this into Power BI. And then I'll also say, maybe this is a weakness on my part, but this is the first time that I've been able to take some fairly detailed, sub entity data and pull together a year-end type forecast that ties to a balance sheet. We talked about forecasting and budgeting a day or two ago, and this is the first time that I've been able to say that I could do it. This is probably the best way that I know of doing it, and now we have it in place. Okay, so I don't want to say that everything we've done is perfect. There are some missing pieces yet. The first one is the questions we always get: are the allocations correct? Where we're allocating, our tractors and our trailers on a per mile basis. So the argument we get is a 2-mile slug through a muddy field at harvest time. Should that get the same allocation rate as driving down the interstate 70 miles an hour? So right now, there's no differentiation between those 2 miles versus the 100 miles on the interstate. So that's a concern we need to continue to work on. We still are lacking, data on our trip miles or trip trip costs, where we needed to quote by vendor or by customer, because each customer has a different mileage distance. We need to have a better understanding of our load and unload time and our drive time to really be able to project and forecast out what that rate should be. Depreciation is based on book. I know we've had discussion on trying to move to a market value. I know yesterday's discussion, I can't remember if it was Dick or Brian's, but their view was depreciation is variable based on utilization. Well, I think that's kind of the direction that we're thinking if we move to a market value. The other missing pieces, our forecasting is based on a fiscal year, and inside that fiscal year forecast, we have cost drivers that are linked to old and new crop year budgets. We probably should transition our forecasting into more of a crop year basis instead of a calendar year basis. Then down in our reporting side, I would say, we've done a great job on getting historical up into the Power BI dashboard, but now we've introduced this forecasted and projected break-evens. That is still in Excel. So we still have 2 places to go look for management information, in Excel and then up in the dashboard. So I'd like to figure out a way of combining those two, so when the group's management wants to look at things, they have one place to go. The other places we need to work on is better automation with QuickBooks and Granular. Right now, we're just doing dumps out of each of those systems, dumps into Excel, and then have those picked up by Power BI. So there's areas that we still need to work on, but we've made a lot of progress the last couple of years in understanding what's going on inside this particular entity. Norm, I'll see if there's any quick questions or discussion. Or Randy, do you have any comments?
Get unmuted here. No, I think I mentioned with earlier that we've been using several different entities, and our main entities are using FBS. The trucking entity is still in QuickBooks, and we're ready to move that as soon as Daryl, as soon as we think that's a good choice. But the farming entity, the other entities that are using, and Daryl's going to get into this. We've been working with Daryl for quite a number of years, and it's been a good relationship. And he's leads us into lots of good directions and helping our thinking process here. But the farming businesses and other businesses, our main businesses are in FBS, and Power BI is able to pull direct from that. Daryl's going to talk about that a little more as we get into that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Randy. And Randy pushes me also, so it goes both ways on and how we move forward. So changing gears a little bit and talk about this farming entity. Again, as Randy shared, the data sources are all FBS, Transaction Plus, Crop Audit. It's a basic operating entity. Basically, it leases all of its equipment and land out. But we do quite a bit of effort, put a lot of time and effort into our activity-based, trying to understand our activity costs. And there's probably a little more detail than most in terms of how we allocate the rent, the equipment rent, and the labor cost all goes to the activity centers. And we'll get into that in a few slides. So this opening screen here, this is the dashboard that we have in place for this entity. And going across, I have kind of broad buckets, the balance sheet, income statement, and then within each of those, say it's under the balance sheet, I have the supporting schedules, accounts receivables, note receivables, so on. Income statement, I have different types of income statement, you know, G&A and executive margin report, have some analysis ratios. You know, yesterday we heard Dick Whitman really stress the importance of understanding trends. I'm going to go in and build some of those thoughts in under analysis and ratios. And then we have some crop reports and custom services reports, and then our allocations reporting. So I'm going to play some videos, and again, it's going to be pretty fast, but the concept is just want to show the navigation and the responsiveness of how this system works. So I'm clicking on balance sheet, go, and there's your balance sheet report. Go back to accounts receivable, and there's your aging report. Accounts payable, and there's your AP aging report. That's a loan report. A G&A report. Okay, so I'm going to play that again because I know that was fast, and just so you can kind of get a feel for what it's doing. I know the first time going through it, it's kind of a blur, so I think it's worthwhile for me to play that again. Just as
So Daryl, John McNutt here.
Sure.
This is all being driven by FBS data being pulled into Power BI at that point for the
Correct.
data?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, John, we'll get into that.
I just, yeah, that helps though. It shows me the possibility. So.
Yeah.
So in this case, all the underlying data is coming out of FBS.
Yeah. In this case, it's 100% FBS data. So that's a demo of the navigation. So as I sit and work with different farm families and occasionally meet with their banker, it seems like we spend 10 or 15 minutes on looking through the financials, and then the question always comes up: well, what's happened to working capital? What's the cause and change of working capital? There's two ways of analyzing that number. There's ways, you could just go in and look at the change in each of the ledgers, which is what I have on the top chart. So anything in red would be a decrease in working capital. Anything in green would be an increase in working capital. So we kind of see by ledger what that change in working capital is. But as I visited with the banker and kind of got into some deeper discussions, that really wasn't what he wanted. He wanted to know the change in working capital, what he called by activity, and he wanted to know what the change was related to operations, related to external term debt, the debt servicing requirements, how much was taken out of from working capital from capital expenditures, how much was brought back into working capital related to term debt proceeds, and then any changes in other balance sheet accounts like owner equity draws, contributions. All those things affect working capital. Well, this way of looking at it by activity was really the answer that he was wanting, instead of looking at it by ledger account change. But I put both options in the Power BI just so we could see the flexibility of different ways of analyzing the same number. But basically, this way of doing the working capital is just an extension of how I do the repayment capacity. I kind of follow the Omaha Farm Credits calculations on repayment capacity, and this is just an extension of that to come up with working capital change. Okay, so like I said, this organization focuses on activity costs, and this is a summary of basically what we would see in the standard cost vendor monitoring report. This is kind of a high-level summary. So we have activities going down, and then we have dollars, our cost driver unit, our dollar per cost driver unit 1, which is our allocation unit. And in most cases, that's on a per hour basis. And we have the change for the prior year. And then we switch over to the billing unit or the activity unit, which is generally acres. So we can see that this particular activity was $29 an acre in 2019, which was 26% improvement over the prior year. So here's an example of our allocation rate increased by 8%, but something with inside efficiencies decreased our billing unit cost per acre. And like Brian showed on his CropZilla, he had variance analysis reporting. That is exactly where I'd like to get to in explaining why we had why we had an 8% increase here and a 26% decrease there. That's variance analysis work that Brian was showing us yesterday. So I want to play the video, and we can kind of go through some drill downs to another report. So again, I'm looking at cost driver units, last year billing unit, activity unit, the change. And then I'm going to go look at this particular activity.
Hey, Daryl, quick question for you.
Sure.
What's the difference between CDU1 and CDU2 again?
Okay, CDU1 is the allocation unit. And for the most part, in this example, it would be on an hourly basis. CDU2 would be the, I'm going to call it the billing unit, or what you're familiar with. In this case, it's mostly acres, because we do our allocation based on hours to the field, how many hours that was in the field, but we want to look at what it really costs on a per acre basis. So CDU1 is hours and CDU2 is acres in most cases.
Thank you.
So here we have the detail of this particular activity for 2019. We have just basic cost center report, dollars per CDU1, and we know what CDU1 is by looking up here. And then our change. Over here is our variable and fixed cost over the last 4 or 5 years, 3 or 4 years here. Another trend analysis down here, and just some basic utilization and number of hours type data for this particular activity. So we go from a high level report, and we're able to drill down into some more detail by year on individual activities. Okay, let's look at the a crop income statement. Again, this is for a grain sorghum crop, kind of a secondary crop for this organization. But we have an income statement going down, dollars per acres, and then dollars per unit. And as we go down, we come across what we have a line is called indirect costs, $196 an acre. And in FBS terminology, that would be all the support centers or activities that took place. So here's a list of all the activities that was applied to that particular crop. And that same $196 shows up here. So we can see at a glance, what the cost was. And if we question, I know when I show these reports, there's always questioning of where that 196 came from. Well, I can go over here and say, hey, it's combining and planting. Here's our allocation unit. Here's our trip multiplier. And this is how we ended up with $196. And then the next question I always get is, well, I don't want to see it by, what makes up these numbers inside here. Well, down here we have it by activity or by ledger. So we're looking at different ledger groupings, labor, equipment leases, freight. For all the different activities, we're able to see what makes up that $196 by ledger. And so in this case, we could see that probably 3/4 of it is related to intercompany lease of that equipment. But if we were live, we would be able to click on, say, that $150, and then the report would be interactive, and it would show where that $150 came from in these different activities. So there's a lot of interactivity once we could get to a live version. Okay, here's another crop income statement example with looking at it by field. The yellow bar or the yellow line is the yield. And you can see that this particular field dropped off significantly on yield. So I wanted to see what the impact was from that yield. So I put together another visual where I have dollars per acre for anything that is selected. In this case, all fields are selected, and I'm going to compare that with the average of all fields, or what it is for the crop year. So when I don't have any field selected, obviously the difference is 0. So I'm going to play the video, and I'm going to select on this field here, then we'll be able to see where that difference is coming from. Again, looking at dollars and what it is for selected crop year, and we select on that field, and then it pulled in the dollar per acre difference. So we're able to see that, you know, that out of that $129 difference, 114 is yield related, price related, revenue related. Okay, next slide, just some quick another way of viewing this data is we like to look at contribution margin. And right now I have, we have units and yield, revenue, variable cost, contribution margin, our fixed cost generates production margin. And we take a G&A and interest out, ends up with a net margin. And all these numbers right now are on a per acre basis for those 3 years. So what I'm going to do is when I play the video, I'm going to go down and select a year and expand it, and then we'll be able to see it by crop, with 4 or 5 crops that's grown, and then I'll select on one of those and we'll expand it to the field. So I've got 3 years selected, everything's on a per acre basis. Select on 2018, those are the individual crops, and then this will take a few seconds. And then we have the same information at the field level. Again, just another way of viewing the data. Okay, I'm just going through a series of types of reports. I wanted to show the end result, and then we'll get into some of the details of how this all works. I just have a few more examples. Here's one by custom services. This chart over here shows the net margin by customer, or in FBS terminology by project. And here's a list of activities that makes up all the custom work. That makes up all the custom work. And then we all have, you know, costs that are applied to some custom fields, like fertilizer and chemicals, and then we get reimbursed for them. This number down here is the net difference of what our reimbursements were versus what are applied. So in 2019, it looks like we're about $2,000 short on getting reimbursed for all of the fertilizers, chemicals. So let me play that video. So just looking at all the activities, the different customers, I'm going to click on particular customer, and it narrows it down to where that 80,000 was generated, the activities. Select on another customer, okay. So it really helps you, you know, in my mind, this data would have been hard to see inside FBS, but once we get it in a visual and then we're able to interact, we can really narrow down to see, you know, what's missing or what didn't get billed out. If we didn't bill out enough, if our rate wasn't good enough, or our rate was too high possibly. Just kind of gives us a quick level to see what's really going on inside the business. Okay, another type of report that we put together is what I'm going to call an executive year net margin report. Basically, you know, from a crop year perspective, you know, crop year will cross over multiple calendar or fiscal years. And then we have other types of centers or other divisions that are more fiscal year basis. But we wanted the ability to look at an executive year, which in this case would be all of 2019 crops, and combine that with any calendar or fiscal year data that comes from custom services or dividends or unallocated. So when we look at it, we could see, you know, where that net income was generated by that what I'm going to call executive year. And if we was to show all the data, we'd be able to see the number of acres grown, the units, and the yield, and then net margin per acre. All that pulls into this executive year report. So in closing on this, I don't know where we're at for time, but wanted to stop here for a short break. But my goal was in this first hour is just to kind of give everybody an idea of the potential of what Power BI can do. As you can see, it has tremendous reporting ability. We can take data from multiple sources and come up with these reports. And the second hour, I want to get into more of the details of how this all works, and some of the descriptions and pieces of Power BI. And then probably what's most important for some of you is is understanding the mistakes I've made, so nobody else has to repeat the same thing. So with that, Norm, you want to take a short break and open it up for questions?
You want to do the questions first?
Yeah, let's do the questions and then a
All
short
right,
break,
all right.
maybe.
Hey, Daryl.
Randy, yeah, go ahead.
Did you do this all on your own by trial and error, the Power BI stuff, or did you loop in somebody that had some additional experience and understanding of it?
For the most part, it was all my trial and error. I will share some of that experience this next slide, but for the most part, it was just long days and long hours and late nights. A lot of trial and error.
Yep, sure. Okay, appreciate it. Thanks.
Randy, do you guys have anything to offer or add to it?
Well, I think you're going to touch about it in the next hour, but it's just, the ability to reach into FBS and pull some of this data. It's there, and how that really works, it works. But
Hey, Randy, are you still there?
yeah, I am.
This is Bob Krugmeyer. I was just wondering, so for these reports, are you going through, do you look at these like once a month, once a week, like kind of what's your, as these reports come up, how do you use them?
So some of these are still in development process, but we're getting a lot closer to where we want to be. And so we're not at the point yet where, as a management group, we're sitting down on a periodic basis. I'm looking at them more than the rest of the folks at this point. There's a gal in my office, Amy Power, that's really, Daryl's really pulls a lot of data together. Emmy's helped him make them look a little prettier. But at this point, it's really about understanding, getting value out of it.
Okay.
And
So you guys are kind of in the, like, what information can we get out of it right now?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's right. It's really about trying to understand presentation, and we're getting a lot closer to where the goal is, but what's the goal?
Gotcha.
And I think there's some really powerful stuff in here that are kind of a lot of things. You're in a management accounting or in a management system. What kind of things do you need to make decisions? Well, it changes from day to day.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't always look at accounts receivable every day or accounts payable every day, but once a week we're looking at them.
Mm-hmm. I know, because yeah, like you guys are setting it up that you can pull a lot of information out of that. It seems like you can pretty much get anything you want. It's just making sure that you're getting the data set up correct, or getting the data set up the way that you need it to, so that it kind of pulls correctly. So that's kind of why you guys are using that S1, S2 system.
Well, the S1, S2 is probably a little bit different in that we're trying to do some averaging there, but yeah, I think Daryl's going to talk about some more of that in the next hour or two on some of these struggles. But
Yeah, Bob, I think we're still learning. I think there's a lot of it. This last year has been understanding what the technology can do. I think we need to spend some time on what's really important and getting that information presented to the management. What's important, we just don't want to throw out a bunch of numbers and trivia. It might be numbers, it might be real, but is it meaningful at that point? Some of these reports probably more meaningful on an annual basis, or maybe every 6-month review type thing. But there might be other types of dashboards that we want to look at every day. And I don't know that we've narrowed that down, what we want to look at on a daily basis versus every 2-3 month interval.
I think that it's kind of ebbed and flowed, because there's some things, just because you can calculate some things doesn't mean you need to do it to calculate them. I mean,
I see them.
And it's pretty powerful.
Because like on the custom stuff, are you guys just focusing more on the per hour when you're dealing with outside clients, and then per acre when you're looking at your own operation?
Well, I think on an activity basis, we manage most everything on a per hour basis, and trying to get those per hour costs down, and then you can translate them to per acre when you're trying to compare to other people, but that's how I look at it anyway.
Okay.
I mean, these are pretty expensive machines. When you're running machines out there at $300 or $400 or $500 an hour, you better be paying big attention.
Yeah.
Okay, Norm, are we ready to start rolling again?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So the second hour, just continue the discussions of what we just went through, but a little bit more in the details. But I do want to show you that some of this technology that we see in Power BI also exists in Excel in terms of Power Pivot. So I want to go through some examples. One example we've done with this technology inside Excel, using the Power Query and the DAX terminology. And then, as Martin talked about yesterday, we're able to connect, eventually be able to collect some of the MASA / data that's coming out of from their API, pull that into Excel. So I don't want to leave out, Power BI is kind of the visualization side of things, but that same technology, at least from the data modeling side, also exists in Excel. So I want to go through a quick example of how we're using that. Here we have a fuel log, and in this particular example, the fuel tank serves multiple entities and family members. So when I was out working with this group, working with the staff, I saw her going through and highlighting these different rows in different colors. So I started quizzing her on what she was doing, and basically those colors represent different entities that fuel needs to get billed to. So as I dug into that, there was quite a process that she was going through to do all the coding to get that into the accounting system. As we talked about, there's other needs for that data, especially on state and Fed tax reporting. We had challenges in our invoicing, our coding for the invoices. And as I was talking to her and thinking back in my mind, can this process be simplified and or automated? So I started working on a fuel log spreadsheet in Excel, and basically this is just a log sheet that we start off with. And the key that we needed to focus on was being able to pull in, in the description, since this is fuel could be allocated to anything within 3 or 4 entities, I needed to be able to pull in the centers from these different entities and get them into a perspective that was easy to select from. So the key to all this is once we had the centers inside Power BI, I was able to pull those center lists and combine them from 3 different entities into a single list and then be able to select from it. So let me play the video and show you how that works. So I'm just typing in some fuel log IDs, gallons, gasoline. Okay, here I wanted to select the 450 Yamaha that was selected earlier. So I'm clicking 450 and then do the pick list, and that list there could be, that list was narrowed down to anything that had 450 in it. And based off of her selection, it filled in the operation center that was needed in our coding, and then it also filled in the operating entity. And I've got that blurred out. So just by her selecting that item, we were able to determine how some of the coding should take place. So from there, we needed to create the invoice. So we had the invoice, and again, once you kind of go through the process, the data modeling process, get it to here, and here's a list of the different vendors. So I'm going to play this video and pulling everything from the data model. Here I'm going to select on an individual, and it creates the invoice for us using Excel slicers. So that was a way, so my goal is to touch the data once. So as she typed it into the data log, we were able to create this invoice. All she has to do is click in a few places and print out the invoice. And then the next process that needs to be done is to get the data inside FBS. So there's some additional tabs, and I've laid it out. I've laid out the data out inside those tabs that would match the FBS import process, the transaction plus import process. So what you see on the screen is just a layout of what it would take to pull in the FBS. So in terms of the detail that it would take, there's primary, there's 3 types of imports. 2 of them that comes from the primary entity, the application records, how that fuel was used, and then there might be some AR entries that we need to bill out to multiple vendors. And then in the second FBS entity, we needed to create an accounts payable entry that posted the fuel to the correct activity. And all of that was generated in that initial data log file. We're still working on this process. We've got some kinks inside the import process, but we're getting there. But the key is, the point I want to make is, we were able to hopefully get the data, put the data in once, and then from there being able to massage it and get it in a position where we can do additional steps with it. All that used to be done manually, and hopefully we're getting to the point where 80% of that time is cut off. So I guess the take-home message on this discussion is, with the use of Power Query, there's extreme capability for in-house data manipulation and automation. for anybody that's in my type of role, I would strongly encourage taking some time to learn Power Query. It will definitely change the way you think and how you do things. I also believe that, you know, going back to my original goal, a single data entry point, I think we can eventually get that single data entry point to meet all of our reporting expectations. Again, just focus on, you know, the potential of Power Query. You know, we do a lot of spreadsheets and links between spreadsheets, and probably half the time I open up a spreadsheet, I'll have one of those dreaded formula links. And I'm hoping with the use of Power Query, of using Power Query and this data modeling concept, and that's probably going to be the way I'm going to start thinking, is in how we transfer data between spreadsheets. The other applications that I've seen and worked with Excel and this Power Query is a Packer kill sheet interface, where the kill sheets had changed, and I was able to take and reformat, redesign the import process back into FBS. Eventually, we'll have the API from the MASA group. And then, you know, I've had granular data from John Deere Office, and when you take dumps out of those systems, you know, there's a lot of extra work that needs to be done. Well, anyway, once you get the scripts in place with Power Query, you're able to quickly analyze and get data out that is more meaningful to you. Another example that I've done with our Excel and Power Query is have one client that's into organic, and they require a lot of detail on, you know, the activities and seeds and dates that take place at the field level. Well, all that data is available in crop audit history reports, but it really wasn't in the format that he could use. So right now we're just dumping those individual tabs into an Excel spreadsheet and going through a refresh process. And then I'm just dumping out a table, a summary that we can filter on, where he could kind of see the detail by field. He could group and organize it however he wants, once we get it kind of all lumped into a single tab on a spreadsheet. I will say that, you know, this process won't be perfect. There's still, you know, error. It's still error prone, but I do think it's a lot better than what I've had available, you know, in my last 20-some years of my career. And I know Martin made a comment about integration with Office 365. I see a lot of potential with, you know, some of the things coming out of Power BI, Power Query, where there could be a lot of magic between FBS and some of these Excel tools, Microsoft tools that's coming out. So I really encourage Martin to continue that path. Okay, changing gears a little bit, talk about some how and the details of what is inside Power BI. And frankly, I am not probably the right person to be sharing or discussing everything that's out there, because there's way more than I know about. But I will try to share some of the things that I've learned and what some of the terminology and some of the key concepts that, at least from an introductory perspective, that we'll need to know. First is the data model. That's the heart and the brain of both Power Pivot and Power BI. The data model starts off with Power Query. That's what goes out and grabs the raw data. And from Power Query, you kind of manipulate it, massage it, and create different tables, different types of information. And you mush them all into what they call a data model. And once you get the tables in place, then you start creating measures, which are similar to, you know, like Excel formulas, but in this terminology, they're called measures. And then once you get the data model in place with all your formulas and all your relationships, then you can start working in Excel or you can start working in Power BI. But the key is to get this data model in place and everything, all the relationships and everything kind of working together. And in the third hour, when we talk about the user-defined report, I'll get into the details on how this works. But from a high level, there's a lot of effort that needs to take place in getting your data organized, transformed, and then getting your data model organized so that you can pull in data into your visuals. Okay, so that's at the getting your data in place. So once you get your data model in place, then we can start working on visuals and taking your desktop visuals and publishing them to the service. And the service is a cloud-based. And I should back up. That data model, all that work is primarily done at the desktop level. So once you get the data modeling and some visuals in place, you publish that up into the service. And this is just some terminology that you'll see once you get into the service. Workspaces would be equivalent to folders or directories. So I think there's a lot of, I need to spend some time thinking about how you would create workspaces or how you would start organizing data that's inside the service. Gateways, that's a tool that allows data connectivity between your local system, your local server, and the Power BI service. And I'll get into this a little bit more, but it's generally a fairly high-end machine computer that allows data connectivity between the service and your internal data files. Data flows, which is the same thing as Power Query, except it's up in the service. And I think you need to start with Power Query at the desktop level, but as soon as you can, move up in the data flows because it will simplify and really reduce a lot of time. Data sets and reports and workbooks, those are all terminology that you'll find. Data sets are shareable. When you read a lot of things about Power BI and its interactivity with other people, they talk about shareable. And that's what they're talking about, is sharing data sets. Reports are reports that we've published up to the service, and we'll get into that. You can also publish workbooks or Excel files up to the service. We've done a little bit of that, but it requires OneDrive, and we don't have all the files that we want on OneDrive to make that work yet. Then another unique thing that's found at the service level is some AI type technology. So what that is you can say you're driving down the road and you pick up your phone and you want to know, hey, what's the accounts receivable for Joe Brown? So you could say, hey, what is Joe Brown's accounts receivable on your cell phone? And if everything is programmed right, it would pop up that answer for you. So that's some of the types of technology that that Power BI can bring to the table is, hey, we start answering a question that, ask a question that responds back to you. That's pretty powerful, but it takes a lot of, I'm not quite there yet in understanding what it takes to make that work, but I've done enough to know that you can ask questions and get a close response back. But what I really want to stress at the service level are these two components. One is the automatic refreshes. So all this data, and John, this kind of goes back to your question, all this data resides on, inside FBS or inside Excel, where access. So through the gateway, we can set up automatic refreshes. And those refreshes can take up to 6 times a day. And what a refresh will do, it will go out and grab all this data that we have linked to, come back in and do all the calculations, do all those things that that we've seen, and it will be ready for you the next time you go look at it. So this morning, before we started this morning, I just went in and took a screenshot of the two systems we have in place, and you can see that the last refresh on one of them was 11:30 last night, and the other one is about 6:30 yesterday afternoon. So what that's telling me is everything that was in the system as of those dates, as of those times last night, is now current on their dashboard. So it's a fairly, once it's in place, the process is fairly automated. You just have to get the data in. You just have to get the data, you know, in FBS and but once it hits the file, you know, the FBS database, whenever it triggers one of these refresh times, then everything that you've seen in these dashboards are updated. The other thing I want to share that I think is important is being able to share or email dashboard views. And I'll have an example of that in just a minute. And as I mentioned, we can also see these dashboards on your cell phones or remote devices. What we've learned is the visuals or the displays that we put together for a desktop viewing may or may not quite fit your cell phone. So as we talked, you know, during break about what's really important to show, we need to be thinking about what's important to show on your cell phone in the, you know, in the smaller space that we have to work with your remote devices. And like I said, once we get up into the service, there's a lot of interactivity with underlying reports. You know, I could see you have say a hedging, you know, have a bunch of your hedging positions and, you know, cash positions in one database, one data model, and then you want to link that to your financial data model. There's capabilities of tying those different data models together once you're up into the service. And again, I haven't got to that point yet, but when I see it, you know, I just see a lot of opportunities out there. Okay, here's an example of an email subscription. We have this set up on a weekly basis. So what you see in this email is what's actually sent out on a weekly basis after a refresh. So to me, this is a way of distributing, you know, your reports to key members that may or may not have a Power BI subscription. Okay, so again, kind of getting to John's questions, is how we doing this? My current approach is we're utilizing a gateway, which is a dedicated computer located on site. And again, it's kind of the bridge between, you know, the data that's on their server and the Power BI. It basically links, you know, the internal files to the service. And this is what allows the refreshes to take place. Within this gateway, you set up your refresh intervals. But I will say that this approach, you know, it's not perfect. There's a lot of, you know, Martin encourages us not to connect directly to the FBS database. So there's a kind of a middle approach where we have to sync. I found a synchronization process where it goes out and copies the, you know, the data, the real data from FBS over into a directory on the gateway machine, and then it's that sync copy that gets linked to the Power BI service. It's not perfect, and it occasionally requires occasional reboots. The gateway is not really simple to set up, so I would kind of consider that a baling wire approach. But it does work, and there's nothing wrong with it. It just takes a little maintenance here and there. Okay, once the MASA API comes out, again, I haven't seen the, you know, a lot of that yet, but connecting to OData that Martin suggested yesterday, I know that's going to greatly streamline and simplify the import process. But then the question is going to come up, will a gateway be required if utilizing the MASA API? Ideally, I'd like to say no, and there's two reasons why. If I've had to do a lot of extra things to make Power BI work the way that I have it set up, and we need to get some of those groupings and some of those special fields in place as part of the FBS system or part of the MASA system for us to eliminate the need for eliminate the need for a gateway. If we don't get those kind of changes in place, then, and you follow the way that I've done things, we'll need to somehow merge and mush, the special setup fields that I have to work with the gateway. But I also anticipate as organizations become more familiar with Power BI and what it can do, there's going to be other requirements, other data needs, other reporting needs that organizations will want to put up on the service that are outside of the MASA API arena. So I anticipate that most organizations will eventually end up with a gateway machine. But ideally, from an FBS MASA perspective, if we get some changes put in, hopefully we can get by without it. Okay, next question that I get is, what's Power BI's cost and licensing? As we heard on the video from Guided Cube, the desktop version is free. You just type in, Power BI download, and you'll find a place to download it. But I will say that it is a fairly intense system. There's a lot of things that take place behind the scenes, and I would not, if you're going to get into it, I would have a higher powered machine to work on it, at least 16 gig, and then I would suggest either OneDrive or SharePoint accessibility. But doing the more intense data modeling, that is very time consuming, and you need a lot of horsepower. Okay, at the service level that we talked about, there's two types of fees. The pro level is where I'm at, and basically it's $10 a month per user. And again, that pro level provides access to smartphones, tablets, and it also allows for some higher level machine learning tools and some sophisticated AI visuals that's not available at the desktop level. So again, those are things that I haven't really touched on, that I don't really know much about yet, but those are just some additional features available at the pro level. Okay, when you go up to the premium level, obviously you can see the $50,000 number is probably not very appealing for many, but that's the level that the large organizations are working with. And one of the positive things at the premium level is what they call paginated reporting, and that will be a weakness of. I'll get into that. That's a weakness that we have in the pro level, is just lack of quality printing. Okay, in terms of we talked about visuals, and Microsoft has probably 15 or 20 canned visuals, matrices and bar charts, pie charts, types of visuals that you saw in some of the reporting. But there's a whole slug of visuals from third parties out there that may or may not be free. And from what I can tell is generally it's $1 to $5 a month for some of these visuals that are based on number of views or number of users. But I don't have any experience with them. I've tried to keep all my efforts down with the ones that are out of the box from Microsoft. There are a few free ones, but my experience is you get what you pay for. I haven't had much luck with them yet. And some of the reason is They require your data to be formatted and summarized in a certain way, your tables to be set up in a certain way, and I don't have, the way I've got it in place now, my tables don't quite match what those visuals require. And I'm sure there's ways of doing it, but I'm just not at that point yet. Okay, on the concern side, like I mentioned earlier, printing is extremely limited. You know, Power BI is a dashboard tool. It's not really a page reporting tool. So I've been disappointed in, you know, Randy will want a printout of a certain dashboard. Well, the printout is, yeah, it's there, but it's really not of high quality. It's not laid out well. It's something that I would not want to, you know, I would not want to give out as an annual report or give to the banker. So that is a concern. Another limitation at the pro level, the $10 a month level, is there's a 10 gig storage limit. And initially I thought that might be a concern, but as I look, the best I understand, the databases I have in place now are less than a gig, or like 0.3 gig. So I'm way below, you know, I haven't even hit, out of the 3 systems I have, I haven't even hit a gig yet. So I don't think this is a concern, but it's definitely an area that I need to learn more as we move forward. So in terms of this, you know, the free desktop version and this $10 a month user fee, obviously that's just a fee that Microsoft is luring everybody to get started with Power BI. How long will that $10 stay in place? You know, if anybody knows inside Microsoft, you know, let me know. But I don't have confidence that that will stay at $10 for very long. Okay, in terms of the implementation, I will just say that, you know, some of the things that I was doing, in my mind, was somewhat complex. And as you get into it and get into some of the Power Query things, it could take, there's some things I was doing, it was taking me 5 to 6 minutes between clicks. And I say clicks. So as you click from one step to another step, you know, it would just go in the background and kind of recalculate everything. And that process was horrendous. And then the refreshes that I talked about, they take between 10 and 30 minutes. And in the development time, that just eats your day away. But once you get it in place and up in the service and have these auto refreshes take place in the middle of the night, I don't care how long it takes, just as long as it's done by the next morning. So the development time, that 30 minutes is a concern, but once it's up in the dashboard or up in the service, again, it could take all night, and I'd be happy the next morning. And, you know, I've got a lot of Excel experience, but learning this DAX formula, DAX language, it has not been easy for me. And I've probably made some, and I think the reason I've had some challenges with it is related to some of the learning resources. And I'll get back to that, but we all know that, you know, the S-shaped learning curve, where you start off, you know, gradual, but you really get a lot accomplished. And I think this is very true for Power BI. You can dig in and do a lot of things. You can perform a lot of magic with some simple skills. And for probably most organizations, that'd be enough. But I've found as you get into some more technical and detailed stuff, some of the things that I showed you definitely is up this curve a little bit. That has been challenging. And I would encourage, you know, either find somebody or train somebody that has some understanding of Power Query, data modeling, gateways to get into the higher level type of reporting that I just showed. In terms of visualizations and navigations, you know, like Randy said, Emmy has been helping me quite a bit. She's done a great job. But I do know, as I look at some of the professionals and some of the dashboard critiques that I watch occasionally, there is just how things are presented are so much better than what I feel I have now. And I know, like looking at Brian's Cropzilla yesterday, that was I just liked how he had everything laid out, and you looked at it and you knew exactly what the answer was or what the point of that page was. And as I say, that reminds me of watching. I've watched a million videos, and one of the recommendations was comment was the 3-second rule. And the comment was, if it takes more than 3 seconds to calculate and see the report, that's too long. If it takes more than 3 seconds to understand the point of that visual, that's too long. And if it takes more than 3 seconds to figure out the navigation of a page, that's too long. And as I've watched people, I can see that. So we've got that 3-second rule is, a totally different world than what we live in today. But I truly think that's probably what we're going to see as people become more familiar with some of this Power BI and dashboard capabilities. Okay, and then I showed you the linking from the gateway from the Power BI service into Excel. And how many of you are familiar with Excel cube formulas? I can't see it, but I sure didn't know much about them until this past year or so. I just found very few learning resources available for cube formulas and how that works. So the video learning resources that I've gone through that I like to use, GuideCube is who we saw earlier, Excel is Fun, Havens, Kerbal, all of these groups put out 5 to 10, 15-minute videos. Excel is Fun is kind of an exception, where this guy teaches a college class, and he I don't know, but he records his video, records his classes, and some of them are fairly detailed and over an hour in length. But this guy is an excellent instructor, and if you want to learn more of the theory behind it, find some of his data information under MSP TDA. There's a lot of good high level of fairly detailed information there. All these others are 5 or 6 minute type videos. Havens Consulting, I really like his. He specializes in visualizations and navigations. Kerbal, I think she's from Denmark, and that's what I found in this. Power BI is a global software, and as you look in their forums and look at their help, I probably half the people I rely on are non-U.S. And Kerbal, she's from Denmark, maybe a little bit of an English barrier, but she just has a way of explaining a problem and then being able to solve that through a 5 or 6 minute video. So I've come to appreciate her and how she just sees and understands problems, kind of the same way that I see things. Moving down to this Mark Walter, he's an individual that I saw in a webinar 2 or 3 weeks ago. He's a CFO for a trucking company. Anyway, he got started in this technology back in the Power Pivot days, and he kind of leads you through some of his experiences of presenting financial information with this technology. Anyway, look up storybi.com and kind of read some of his blogs. And if you want to know how to do some income statement reporting, here's a link to how he does his income statements. So the question was asked, or I started asking, how did I learn all this? All this was done by watching these videos and a couple books that I've got. Probably the mistake that I've made was I didn't have a good resource just to understand the foundations that we were dealing with. When you watch these 5 or 6 minute videos, it just kind of takes you from topic to topic, but it really doesn't build on the foundation. And the challenge that I'm having today is probably things that I missed at the foundation level. here's some books that I've got. Power Query is Image for Data Monkey, DAX, Power Pivot, and Power BI. This particular book is probably more Excel based, but the concepts are the same. And then this group here out of Italy, again, they're fairly high level, but once you kind of understand the terminology and lingo, that's the place to go for your foundational learning. I know I've read the first 100 pages or so, and that's helped me, and I need to reread them. But the remainder of the book is pretty complex and beyond me. So I know there's a lot more out there. Okay, so probably what's most important that people want to learn are the mistakes that I've made. And I think the first mistake is I started off with a complex project. Going back to that trucking services example that we showed up front, that was my first project. I should have started off with something a little more simple and go through the entire process instead of tackling something that complex. Whether or not that was good or bad, but I probably wasted a lot of time fumbling around on a more difficult project. I probably should start out more simple. The other thing is having stable data sources. Again, mistake that I made was trying to use dumps out of QuickBooks, dumping them to Excel, and then I was using that as my data source. But as I learned, and honestly, there's something called, what's it called, data flows. That's it up in the service. Once I kind of got a handle on how data flows work, then all those queries, all the initial load queries, I could set up in the data flow, and then it would just be sitting there, and I could link to those data flows within the desktop version of Power BI and eliminate probably half of the queries that I had in place, because they were already up in the data flows and I just had to link to them. So I talked about the 30-minute waits or the 5 to 6 minute between clicks. By getting data into the data flows, that 5 to 6 minutes was probably reduced down to maybe 2 minutes. Didn't eliminate it completely, but definitely reduced the time. Again, back to a question earlier, how I learned this, just learned it on my own. I did reach out to some people on guru.com, and I just had a hard time explaining what I wanted. I had examples in front that we could discuss, but I think between my lack of knowledge at that time of Power BI and what I really wanted, and then throw in this activity costing concept, I just wasn't getting very far with some of these contacts I made. So that's when I knew I just needed to get further along so I could show it to people, and then help me develop from there. And then as I did that, I met with some, being here in Lincoln, Nebraska, university town, I reached out to some contacts I had within the university and talked to some grad students and students. And what I realized that, they've got a lot of, they've taken classes in Power BI and business intelligence, but I felt like everybody knew what, they were all experts in dashboards, but I still needed help in the data modeling and design. And I just didn't feel that anybody that I talked to really understood what I was trying to get to. I did attend, when I first got into this, I did attend a training put on by Power Pivot Pro, and it was a fairly expensive class that I took, but I did that just to meet some of the players and to see if this technology was real. And obviously there was follow-up from that class, and some of their consultants was calling me to figure out how to do this, to generate some business from me. And as I explained it, and I got 2 hours from them to kind of talk this through, they came out with a 30 grand estimate if I was to work through this Power Pivot Pro group. And I didn't want to go down that trail very bad. So, and then the other thing is, I've watched 1 million hours of video. One of the challenges I had was when I had a problem, it was hard to find a video that really matched the problem that I had. So for every problem that I had, I probably watched 5 videos and sent 2 or 3 questions up into the Power BI forum. So as I move forward, I need to find somebody that I can call upon and be a little bit more efficient with my time in terms of finding people. Okay, DAX, at least wasn't easy for me to grasp. Again, I've got a lot of background in Excel, and all I can say is this data modeling is just a different animal than what you expect. You know, if you come from an Excel background, it's just a different animal. And I think some of the reason it was hard for me to grasp is, again, my learning process. I didn't start off with the foundations. I started off watching videos, and I lacked the foundational understanding of data modeling and what filters mean, and you know, use relationships mean. I didn't understand those concepts up front. The other mistake that I've made as I've rolled this out to different groups is all the reporting formats are being generated in Excel, and the terminology, kind of the terminology that I've been using, and I failed to mimic the reports that people were familiar with. So as I showed reports, obviously the first question is, well, I don't understand it, don't believe it, because it doesn't match what I see over in FBS. As I move forward, I need to somehow fix that, where I could mimic what's inside FBS, some of their FBS reporting and some of their FBS layouts, report layouts, and pull them into Power BI. So when we see a report in Power BI, we can reflect back to FBS and just not go through that learning curve of another report format and different terminology. So that would be a weakness that I need to continue to work on. So as we close out, again, I don't know where we're at time-wise, but as we close out here, ask the question, will data analytics transform your business? Will data analytics transform the way you process data? You know, as I look at it, even though this has been hard, I don't want to go back to the old way of doing things. You know, the reporting, the automation. Now that I've sensed and tasted it, I don't want to go back to the old way. But the change is hard, and so the real question is you know, how do we move forward as a group to avoid the learning curve process, especially the data modeling process, and get more into where the end user could just focus on the reporting and creating their own visuals the way they want it. To me, that's where we need to come together as a group, is to think through how we can consolidate the difficult things that I've had to go through, and have that as a service through through MASA. But as I look back from my career, you know, where I'm at now, you know, it hasn't been easy, but I see so many positives. I can see so many things how I can do better in the type of work that I do, that I know I would have regretted by not trying. So from that perspective, you know, this last year and a half has been rewarding to me, because I now know that this kind of reporting is possible through some of these data analytic tools. So with that, Norm, open it up for questions and get ready for our next session.
Okay, fire away, folks.
Daryl, I would tell you the hardware cost hasn't been, you know, that part of it hasn't been really expensive. We bought a used gateway machine and had it installed for less than $1,000. So it's really the human capital that, the time that's takes to put it together is what gets expensive. But
Yep, yep.
Daryl, you mentioned, this is Blake Hollis. You mentioned something about you hoped that there might be a way that we could structure things so that a gateway machine at each with each firm is not necessary. Can you speak to that a little bit? What possibilities exist?
Okay, well, what I was referring to was I've had to do some extra things to make FBS work better, primarily in the setup tables, like in the center setups, where we have groups of centers. I've had to use Excel to create those groups, and if we have to, if we maintain the Excel, let me rephrase. If so we work with MASA, if we can get some of those concepts that I've had to use with Excel and built inside the MASA system, then we could probably eliminate the use of needing the gateway machine strictly for FBS data. But because I'm doing some additional things, some additional setup requirements that's not available within the FBS right now, that's why I say that we may or may not need to have a gateway machine for the use of FBS. Does that help?
Yes.
But it's the additional setup that I've had to implement that's not available within MASA yet that would require a gateway. If you followed my format, if somebody is to take their own, go out and connect to the MASA API and create their own dashboards, they may do things completely different, and you may not need it. But the way I've set it up, we would need some of those things.
Hey, Daryl, this is Bob Krugmeyer. So I guess my question on the setup tables, how many of those setup tables did you have to pull from FBS and put into Power BI in order to get kind of your setup? The way
Well,
you have it now?
it's about everything. Your ledger tables, setup, center tables, your project tables, your inventory tables, your feed, chemical, seed, all those tables. And then report formats. I've got canned report formats, and all those were brought in through Excel. And I consider those as part of the setup table. So there's quite a few.
Gotcha. So when you do your data pulls from FBS, do you pull the raw data out, or do you pull some sort of report format?
No, it's the raw data. We connect to a copy of the access file, actual access file that's inside FBS. So I'm pulling the real data. I'm pulling the raw data, the transactional data.
So Daryl, just thinking about all the barriers of scaling this and replicating it, sounds like it starts with a data model and maybe works to the visualization at the end. But how many other steps would be required? Let's assume you had half dozen people decided they wanted the same output. But what would be the processes that had to be established to make that happen?
Well, Norm, that gets into what I want to discuss in the last 30 minutes, the next steps. It wouldn't take much just to copy, the queries I have in place and, redirect them to a different location. That part would be fairly simple. But again, it's the complexity of, WIP centers, and WIP centers are hard to deal with inside Power BI. It's the I can't think right now, but it's the groupings. Like I've created what I'm going to call divisions, and those are just groupings of different types of centers. I mentioned having resource centers and activity centers, different services centers, different crop centers. Those are all, we need to have a way of grouping those centers into divisions. So it's that kind of setup, Norm, that I think would be needed to really move to the next level with FBS users.
Okay, does that go back to the FBS data model or something?
Well,
else?
it comes back to, well, I'm not sure what, I think that source has to come from FBS, yes. Some changes within FBS to make that work. And again, I've got some slides on that in the last session here.
All right. I think Martin might be joining us here. I neglected to invite him, but maybe some things that he can respond to some of your,
Okay.
questions.
Yep. Yep. But if you just wanted to pull up, we've got one client that he's just connecting to the access files, and he's just looking at things by ledger, and he's got a connection to the ledger table, and he's just looking at it by ledger and by center, and he's seeing trends in repair costs, he's seeing trends in labor costs by labor pool without all this extra stuff, and maybe that's sufficient. But to get to the level of divisional reporting and executive year reporting, contribution margin, all that, it's going to take some extra setup. Or then that change in working capital, which is based off of repayment capacity, that takes some specialized setup. That would have to communicate, if it came from FBS, it would just simplify a lot of gateways and setup that the local user would have to do.
Hey, Daryl, this is Bob Quirkmeyer again. Question on the reporting. Do you kind of use, so you said that you can't really create PDF reports. Well, the PDF reports that come out of Power BI aren't really that great. So do you just kind of use like the emails as a proxy for the reports?
Well, that would be one way, but ideally, Bob, is everybody just have a $10 subscription. They look at it on screen or on the phones. I think that's the way this is designed, is for dashboard viewing. But yeah, or you could take screenshots and put them into a Word document. Again, it's not perfect, but I think that's where we're at right now. Okay, but I will say, if you move up to what they call the premium level, the $50,000 fee, and I mentioned the paginated reporting, the examples that I've seen on those and some of the videos that I watched on those, that's exactly the type of reporting we're used to getting out on paper, but that requires additional fee and additional setup at the paginated reporting. And possibly, from MASA's perspective, and again, I don't know how this would work, but maybe MASA could get into an annual, a single fee, a single $50,000 fee, and then subdivide that out between its members, and then that might allow for paginated reporting. Again, I don't know that, but it's probably something worth considering. And I'll also say, there's a lot of third-party people that's coming into the market now, and eventually they might come up with a workaround on the printing. There's just so much, there's a lot of industry activity around Power BI and a lot of third-party tools available. Maybe there's already a tool out there that I don't know about. But to me, I don't know if it's a concern right away. I just know that what we see now is so much better than what we've had in the past.
Yeah, like those Power BI reports that you were pulling up on your dashboard, like those look great. So it's kind of like, I'm just trying to think, how would you, like, the best way to take that and just get it into a PDF? Because to me,
yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, well, because kind of like what we're when Randy and I were talking before, it's kind of when I think dashboard, I think something that you're going to be looking at every single day. So like it's kind of a, you know, Randy isn't going to be looking at isn't going to be looking at, you know, like working capital every single day. It's something that you kind of look at, you know, maybe once a week, maybe once a month. So it's kind of, I think kind of having those reports and be able to make sure that when you have those reports set up, as long as you have kind of your process in place so that, you know, you're getting all your cash reconciled out, you're getting all your AP and AR cleaned up, it's kind of pushing that out into the dashboard, and then getting that, more or less just getting a screenshot of that dashboard that you can send out to your kind of the stakeholders in management.
Yeah, no, that's an option. But it'd be in an email format, and again, it's not a professional-looking annual report. You know, I think it'd be hard to put together an annual report off of here. But I do know, and again, probably speaking out of line here, but I do know there's third parties that you could, and I tried it, but you could link these visuals to a PowerPoint presentation, and it would be live. You'd be talking through a presentation, and that visual would be live. So there's, you know, as I say that, if that technology exists in PowerPoint, it probably eventually exists, you know, in other tools. Or maybe it already does.
One of the pluses too is, I'd say, once you bring that service up, you know, for one of our folks, it's pretty quick to jump around and look at different things. It's not like you got to bring up a menu and take time to run a report. It's just bing, 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 all there.
Yeah, the videos that you showed, those were real-time videos. There's that one drill down to the field level, you know, that took a few seconds. There are other reports that we have that, you know, they do take 10, 15, 20 seconds to generate. So what I showed you was a sample, but some of the more complex reports do take a little more time. But not minutes or 50, you know, within a minute, within 30 seconds. Okay, so what we hope to discuss or go through the next hour is probably the more technical side of everything we've been talking about. But I chose hopefully a fairly easy example of taking, you know, the Smart Feeder user-defined report, which is down here in the green. Everybody's familiar with that layout, and hopefully end up with a dashboard, tables, visuals that I have overlaid down here. So next hour, I want to kind of go through quickly the process of getting to this point. Be high level and pretty fast, but kind of give you a feel for some of the terminology, way of doing it. So let me view. So, and if Martin's on the phone, he would probably have a lot more detail to talk about in some of the data modeling concepts. But for now, I just want to throw basically probably 2 or 3 years of college in one slide. So I know I'm missing a lot. But basically, the way I've learned things is you have different types of tables. You have what you call dimension tables, and then you have fact tables. And dimension tables are items that don't repeat. So like we have an example would be a calendar table, and then a group table, which just gives you your basic, you know, group ID, the center, source, dates. And the way it was described to me, those are generally short and wide. Fact tables are long and narrow, and the layout that I have is I have group ID, then line descriptions, and then these are the columns within those for each of the line descriptions. Again, this is just a very basic way of taking those user-defined report and getting into a table format. So this is key to understanding is how to set up your tables, and then you'll get into table relationships. In other words, how do these tables relate to each other. And you'll see that, I got group ID. Well, that's a relationship. They stay, they're connected. They have a common element. And then we have dates up here. They connect to dates down here that would be in the fact table. And then what relationships allow you to do is to create links between tables. And if anybody's familiar with Excel and lookups, VLOOKUPs or index match, that's what relationships do, is automates that process. There are many forms of relationships, and most of them that I use is what I call one-to-many. So we have one group to many items or many detail facts for that group. And again, Martin I'm sure is very familiar with this terminology, but some of the things that I've kind of had to learn over the last year. Then once you get your tables in place, you start working on DAX measures. And again, those are the formulas or the math that pulls everything together in the data model. So the first step is to create the tables that we talked about. So we use Power Query to do that. And again, I'm just going to kind of go through the steps, and then I'll go live with actual Power BI to do this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to the data, and I have a query that's called initial load. And I'll show that, and then I'll create the dimension table, the project table, then I'll create the fact table, and then I have a calendar table that's already in place, and then from there we'll create the relationships. I'm going to just show you some PowerPoint, the steps of PowerPoint, and then we'll go live. Okay, additional tables that we need to set up, and this is what we talked about earlier, Norm, is extra things that I've had to do to make FBS work. So we need what I call a subheader grouping, income statement headings, and then, like I said, longer term goal was to utilize some FBS predefined formats. But that's some additional tables that we have that I need to have in place. So the end result of the fact table, and this is a result of Power Query. So if you look under DIED, I have DIED as a subheader. Obviously, there's no dollars associated with DIED, and 34 head died out of that group, 5,200 pounds, 5,300 pounds, and then nothing related to what I have the stat account. So under pounds of gain, that's a stat account. There's 592,000 pounds of gain. Again, this is the data that comes out of the FBS group report, and this is the end result that I want to get to from all the Power Query massaging that I do. And I'm just trying to show the end result here. So the relationships, obviously, this is my fact table, user-defined fact table. I have a relationship, a one-to-many to the IS header table, and then a one-to-many to the group table. And then I have some other subsidiary tables that tie to some of these. Again, just to kind of get you familiar with the terminology and what you'll see. Some of the measures, and I was surprised, but I ended up with over 50 measures in this example. And again, measures would be equivalent to an Excel formula. And so basically, like for animal days, you start off with a function called calculate, and then I'm going to calculate anything that is within the sum stat measure. And then I have filters on, so anything that's within the subheader with animal days is going to generate the number of animal days for that. It's going to generate the number of animal days. So that's just an example of a measure, the format of it. Feed pounds fed is the same concept, using this subheader feed as my filter. Pounds sold, it's a little more complicated formula, and I'll explain why as we get into example. But basically, there's 3 sub-formulas to return the main formula, to return the value. So in some cases, I need just subheader sales, which is this sum of pounds. In other cases, I need to do it based on, whether it's grade 1 or DOA standard sales. Again, just some filters and some additional, depending on where you're at in the visual, it'll pull in a different value based on, again, we've got three variables, three measures, three calculations inside one measure. And I'll get
Daryl,
into
I have a
that.
question.
Sure.
Blake Hollis here. Are these measures, is there some graphical user interface you're developing these within, or are you just, how are you creating these measures?
Well, they're part of there's an editor that you go through, and I'll pull one of those up, show it to you. But yeah, it's just like in Excel, you start typing in a formula, and then it will there's an IntelliSense behind it, and it'll kind of lead you through the process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, again, guys, this is just high level and just to kind of get your feet wet on some of the terminology. So with that, let's go live and kind of go through the process. So this is what you see when you open up Power BI. You've got different menus. Over here are your different types of visualizations. And then here's the data fields that we'll be pulling from. Again, a typical Microsoft look and feel. So the first thing we want to do is go collect the data. So I'm going to go into Power Query. That's under what they call transform. You probably lost it. Okay. So do you see something called initial load as a query? What are you guys seeing? It flipped open a new window, so I'm not sure you're going to be seeing what I see.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay.
Close out Power Query editor.
Yep. Okay. So this is, like I said, you have to go out and connect to the data. You have to connect to the data. So in this case, I hope you can see basically the formula. I'm going out to OneDrive, in this case SharePoint, and I'm going to be pulling in a file that's in the desktop FBS, SU50D, BFH data, and I'm going to pull in a certain file name. So right now that file name is called SFUD closeouts. Okay. So, and all that file is a copy of the dump. We have the user-defined report that out of FBS. I just dumped that into Excel. So that's all that file is. And I lost myself here. So first step is to collect on the source, which is the file, the navigation. Okay, so now we pulled in the actual contents of that file. So that should look familiar to most of you. That's just a SFUD report lines, and then I just got one group in there for now. So that's just the data that I'm pulling in from the Excel file, which originated from SmartFeeder. Okay, then you can go through a script, and I'm going to remove some rows. And again, that process, there's menu options up here on top where you could actually remove rows. You click on that, and I said I wanted to remove top two rows. So that's how I started it. And I'll just go through that and then delete it. So I want to remove. I'm going to go back up. Okay, and I want to remove the top two rows. So if I didn't have the script in place, I would just say remove rows top, and I want to remove the insert a step, and I want to remove the top two rows. Okay, so that's how you would create the query the first time. But since I already had that in place, I'm going to delete that again. So I'm just deleting a step inside that query. This is part of the automation process. So I've removed some rows. Now I'm going to get rid of a bunch of blanks. So anything with null or spaces, I'm going to filter out. And again, that's just done through, I went to that column and I want to say remove empty. And that will create that step for you. Okay, and then I wanted to transpose the table. So I start off with the data all in rows, and for where I needed to go, I needed to transpose this table and convert those rows into columns. And again, that's just one of the menu options up here. And then I filtered rows again, get rid of all the extra junk, all the nulls. And from there, I promoted the headers. So what's in row 1 now becomes a header. Okay. Again, all these steps are available as a menu option up in here. But I just want to go through it real fast and not stumble through this presentation. So that's our initial load. That's the format that I needed initially to get to the two tables that I talked about, the group table and the fact table. So I'm going to close that out. And I'm going to go back into the second table, and that's going to be the group table. So we start off with what we ended with at the initial load. So my source is my initial step in this query is what I ended up with on the initial load query. And then I wanted to trim some text. There's some spaces involved. Get rid of some extra spaces. Then I wanted to remove columns that I don't need. So the only columns that I wanted to keep in this particular table was group ID, center description, lot type, capacity, source. It's 3 or 4, 5 or 6 different data elements. And then I'm going to change type. So that's table number 1. That's one of the dimensions table I created. The second table that I had to create was the fact table. And before I do that, I want to go talk about this subheader table. And basically, the subheader table is a matching of what I needed for Power BI, a generic format that I created for Power BI. I needed a way of mapping what I needed versus what was coming out of FBS as a report line. So anytime the system comes across a report line that's called group ID, I'm going to map it to a header as type group, a subheader as site, and then I'm going to consider that as wherever I have X's, I'm going to consider that as a static count. So like the basic stuff here is all going to be considered static counts. Head died, I have labeled as a head. And that'll show up in the head field. Again, this is kind of a mapping process for me that maps the the closeout group report with what I needed for Power BI. So let's go back to the closeout table and start at the top. Again, my initial start goes back to that initial load query. And then I'm just going to, again, remove a bunch of columns I don't need anymore for this particular table. So if I go up to, I can click on here. Okay, so what I have selected are the columns I wanted to keep for this particular table. And you'll notice that what I unselected were basically what I used in the group table. So basically I kept everything other than what I already had available. So all these fields checked are going to end up in the fact table. So from there, I'm going to unpivot back to the middle, and basically it just from columns to rows. The smart feeder line description. Now I'm going to rename some things. Rename that what they call attribute to report value. Now I'm going to bring in the subheader table. Okay, so I need to merge the actual data with the mapping process I talked about. So I'm going to merge table with the subheader. So that's just a okay. This is the menu that you see. So tag this line out of the closeout fact table with this. I'm going to marry those together. And when you do that, it creates a table, and then you can expand that table. And basically, it matched those two tables together. I'm going to. So now I have, the line that came out of Smart Feeder, value that came out of Smart Feeder. Now I'm going to go through a process of mapping each of these lines to these different data fields that we needed to these different, we needed pounds, we needed stat, and we needed dollars. I don't quite have these in sequence, but so what I'm going to do now is anything that's with an X in where's my dollar table? Where's my dollar table? Right here. So anything with an X in the dollar table, in the dollar column, is going to put that value over in a new column called dollars. So again, this is just my mapping process. So anything that has dollars that matches up with the double X's out of my map, then it puts in that value, else 0. Do that for head, pounds, and then your stat account. Change the type from value to number. Rename some columns. Remove columns I don't need anymore. Replace, okay, here I needed on the sort loss, it came in from the group report as a positive number, but obviously on an income statement, sort loss is a negative income account, or a contra income account. So anything that had the word sort in it, I just replaced it with a negative amount, negative dollars. Change type on one, and then if you notice, like on deaths, I still have 2 rows for. Again, I just have one group in this example. I got 2 rows for with the subheader died. First row being 30, the number of head, and the second row is pounds. I wanted to condense that all into a single row. So I just see died once for that particular group. So there's a feature called group rows, and I'll show you what that looks like. So for these columns, for these data fields, I wanted to group anything that had these in common. I wanted to group the dollars into a column named dollars. I wanted to group head into a column named head, all the way down. So that's what allowed me to go from, having deads on 2 rows to deads on 1 row. Would I have had to do that? Power Query would have worked, all the data modeling and DAX would have worked fine. I'd kept it on 2 rows. But I put it this way because this is probably the way, if we was pulling live from FBS, obviously deads, we'd probably have, 4 or 5 entries for deads in a certain group. We'd pull in those groups or those deads 1 line at a time. But each death entry would obviously have pounds and feed to it. So I kind of wanted to mimic what I would expect to get out of when we go live with FBS connectivity. So from there, so now I've got several tables created. I've got the IS header table, which is just our income statement format, and again, on the income statement, you got subtotals. So subtotals have a little different type of calculation than the individual section totals than what revenues and marketing might have. Net revenues would want to add those together. Procurement, all your production costs. I treat it as an I type. Now, those are just special codes. So as your measure goes down through the formula, goes down through the income statement, it looks at that code and performs a little bit different measure. Production costs are special, subtotals, and then we've got margins, which is everything from there on top down. And then what our denominators might be. So if you look under revenue, my denominator type is the same thing as what the individual row is going to be. And I'll show that to you. But everything else, I'm using total out as my denominator. All the other line records on the income statement are my denominators. Okay, so that's kind of a layout of the tables. Close and apply. Now let's go look at the relationships. And that would be right here. And again, this is the same visual that I showed earlier. And to create relationships, it's pretty simple. I'm going to delete this. Delete. Okay, to recreate it, all you do is go from header down to header. So that process is pretty simple. Okay. So right now, let me just, okay, then we got the calendar table, and that's just I won't go into a lot of detail, but something you got to create, and this is just an automatic feature that I'm using on this particular example. The other tables that we have, let's just look at the end result for the tables. Groups. Okay, I just have one group right now. That's what that table looks like, and those are called dimensions. And then let's look at the closeout, the fact table. Again, that's out of one group. That's kind of the end result that we end up, the layout that I have for one particular group. So I've merged in the header line that ties to the income statement, dollars, head, and pounds as different columns, data fields, purchases. We've got dollars, number of head, pounds. Again, this is all in the data layout and getting the data in place so you can start working with measures. So as I say that, let's go look at a few measures now. And I've got those right here. So let's just look at, okay, there are some foundational measures that you need to put in place when you start this process. So the first one is just a summation of the dollar column. And Blake, I'll show you how that works. So you just type in sum, sum, and then it creates the formula for you. And close. I forgot what I had. So you go down and find the table. See. Dollars. Okay, so it filled in most of it for you, but that's how we'd create, that's the editor that's behind the DAX formulas. Let me show you another one. I think I talked about animal days. Okay, so here's the formula that I have on that. So you introduce the calculate function, and that's used on probably 80% of the measures anymore, but that just triggers special features. And I'm going to calculate the SumStat foundation measure, and then my filter is going to be anything where the subheader has animal days in it for any group. Other measures you might be interested in would be Okay, I mentioned the income statement measure. Now this one is a little more complex, and I'll show you an example why. But here we introduce some is filtered, and as people that have worked with me on it, we always, when you drill down on certain things, you always get a bunch of extra junk. Well, the is filtered command takes out junk that you really don't need. And that's part of the learning curve, is understanding what is filtered really does. But then basically you have what you call a switch command, which is just a fancy multi-if statement in Excel, multi-if then else statement. So if it's saying, if it comes across a line with net revenue, I want to pull in the measure that says net revenue. Production cost, pull in those lines. So that's kind of the format, that's the measure that we use to generate an income statement. So as it goes down the line, it triggers different measures. And let me go look at a net revenue measure. Okay, so here I'm pulling in, again, it gets complicated with this count row stuff, but I needed that so certain things, when you drill down, that it prevents drill down, basically. But I needed to calculate the net revenue measure, and I needed to clear the filter out of the IS header table. And I'll show that, I'll explain that why in a minute. But I wanted to pull in anything that was within the header ID, less than 20 or greater, less than or equal to 20 or less than 39. And back to Norm and your how MASA and FBS could, what MASA could do to help make this better is help generate some of these rules or maybe some foundational measures that they would be consistent across everybody. Because I'm sure, when you create an income statement, I just assumed that it was, section 20 through 39 that was production cost. I don't know that that would be the case for everybody, but that would be a place for standardization. Okay, so that kind of gives you a feel for measures. Now let's get to the fun stuff. Let's create some visuals. And let's start off with, I'm just going to throw animal days in, just as a starting point. So we can just throw that in. And what that does, it just creates a simple bar chart adding up all the animal days. Okay, so what can we do with that? If we don't like a bar chart, let's change it to a numbers. And since we just have one group, that's all that shows up. So let's put in the group ID. So we just go look for that group ID, and we can select either one of these. Let's select this one, and let's just throw that down in the value section. And there we have the group ID. So if we want to look at feed pounds, again, these are all measures that I've pre-created, and I'm just putting them in the table so we can see them. Then let's look at feed conversion. I have that right here, so I'm just going to slide that down. So what is the measure for feed conversion? I'll show that to you. Basically, no, that's not it. This one. Basically, feed conversion is your total pounds fed divided by pounds of gain. That gives you your feed conversion number. So that's a quick way of starting to see the results of your measures. And if we wanted to look at it by, let's put it into let's get rid of animal days, and let's just focus on feed conversion. Well, with one group, it's going to be hard to do. But from here, you could start, playing around with different groups and doing all different types of, playing with the data just by doing this. Okay, so for right now, I want to jump to some predefined layouts that I already have in place. And let's just go to monthly closeouts. And I'm going to unselect some stuff. Okay, and there's kind of a predefined, you know, something I've already defined for an income statement. And then here we've got our production cost, net revenue per head. It doesn't make much sense with just one group. But if we was to start pulling in, you know, larger groups of data, the way I've got it set up is under transform, I'm going to go change my prep. I got a parameter that's already set up. So when I started this process, I was just pulling from a file that was called test, and it just had one group in it. So now I'm going to pull from a file that has all the groups in it. So it's just pulling from another Excel file. And let me OK it. And at that point, it's going to say, hey, I need to go out and update the data because something has changed. So you can apply changes. So what it's doing now, it's going out to a different data source. And there it pulled in, I think there's about 70 or 80 groups that was in this data set that I have. So in this particular visual that I have, it's sorted by month. For all groups closed in January of 16, that was my revenue per head. Down here is, you know, a line chart, a combo line chart and bar chart, where the line is the revenue and the green, the bar is the cost. So you can see where, you know, out here there's some profitability, you know, and where the bar line is below the bar, obviously it was a loss season. But going across, you can see all the, you know, the different months represented. Go to a different tab, performance tab. Again, we have, in this particular bar chart I created, we have feed conversion, average daily gain, percent death loss, segregated by the center. This happens to be the center code that Norm had. So in this visual, I can see, you know, how these differ by center. And then over here is my cost per head by center for that particular. If I wanted to narrow it down to just 2016, you just click on the slicer. If you want all years, you just click them all. Okay, another layout where we have, you know, our in a table format, a group's going down. And again, this is all, you know, all defined, but in this particular layout, I just went over here and I said I wanted my utilization measure. So I slid it into this well, they call it. I want to know my head sold, and I slid that in, just like I was doing a little earlier. And then if we wanted to slice and dice, we have, and I'll show you how to create a slicer right quick. So I'm going to take that out. So right now we've got all different sources. So if I want to create a new slicer for sources, I go find that in the group table. And I'm just going to slide it over here someplace, out of the way of everything, and it brings up that box. But I want to create a slicer out of it. So there's a visual over here for slicers. I select that, and by doing that, click on that, and then things change. So adding a slicer, like I just showed, it's pretty straightforward. You know, it's getting the combination of slicers and the type of slicer. That's important. So that's a quick run through of what I've done for dashboard reporting. Oh, I know, I was going to show the income statement format. Let me go to a different page. So on the how to create an income statement, IS header. I could type. Okay, so I've got a header ID. That's the format that I wanted to use. Okay. And then I want to throw in what I'm going to call the IS. I call it IS cascading. It's my terminology. It's probably not the best terminology, but I want to throw in this measure that we talked about earlier. Okay, that's the measure that was created. I'm going to throw that into the visual. Oops, pick that one. Okay, so for all the groups for the time period, that's, you know, the total revenues. And you know what, for this, I'm going to switch back right quick. I'm going to go back to just a single closeout. So all I'm doing now is just going to pull in a file that has one closeout in it. So now we're just down to one group. So what I wanted to show, I forgot, getting ahead of myself, but what I wanted to show was how you can do drill downs. So I'm going to look for subheaders. And I am going to pull this subheader in and put it right in there. Oops. Okay, so I've got a table format, so I need to convert it to a matrix. And I need to move subheaders back up under rows. Okay, and then I need to go flip on the row wherever it's at. And then down here, there's an option to plus or minus icons. Okay, so what I've done here now is in this matrix, I have asked, I've got two levels of reporting. One is at the header level, which is what you see now, and then I'm going to drill down to the subheader, so under revenues. So under revenues, I have different types of sub-detail for revenue. So I got DOAs, I got grade 1 premium. So those are the dollars that's reflected. Now I want to show the head that's represented in each, we talked about the denominators. Now I want to show the head that's reflected in each of those. So where we're head sold, I think it is. If I throw that down into values. Okay. See, all of a sudden we start getting wacky numbers wacky results when we throw something that's kind of outside the bounds of the relationships that we have in place. But what I wanted to show was down here under revenue, there were 33 head that were represented as DOA and substandards. There's 2,119 head that were grade 1 sales, and 2 head that were, there's only 2 head that had premium dollars associated with it. And then there's 1,900 head that had a sort loss tied to it out of this group. The key is getting the right denominator against the right dollars. So if I go back over here and find my IS cascading dollar per head number, right there, I'm going to pull it down into my values. Okay, so when I do that, I am now calculating the average dollars per head for that particular line. So that 33 head averaged $37 a head for substandards. Grade 1s were $127 a head. But the only way I could do that was that, you remember I mentioned how had those special commands on the head sold, the filter commands? That was the way that I could say, hey, at this individual line level, I wanted to pull in the head for substandard sales, but for everything else in my denominator, I wanted to use the total head sold. So that was the reason behind the complexity of that head sold denominator. But let me take out that head sold denominator, and then that report look a lot cleaner. So now when I take that out, you drill up. So $123 overall per head. You drill down, you can start seeing the detail on a per head basis. I've got the same formula for 100 weight switch. I'll just throw it in. Oops, wrong one. Okay, so it's once you get your measures in place, you can start doing a lot of things with with your visuals. Another thing that I'm sure is going to ask, we don't want that weird name showing up on our reports, so we can just go down and rename it, at least at this level, into just dollars. So it renamed that column to dollars. So there's some flexibility in how things are named. So with that, that was kind of a fast and dirty dive into some of the details on how this works. Let me go back to the entire data set. Whoops. Again, I'm just switching to a different file. So there's your updated file with new data. So a very quick dive into some of the concepts behind, Power BI. What it, we went from just a single closeout report, dumped it to Excel, created a couple tables that go to make this work better, and then created some visuals along with the different measures. So again, very, very fast, but hopefully enough to kind of give you a feel for some of the concepts behind it. So with that, Norm, I'm sure there's going to be some questions.
Go ahead, everybody.
Or did I lose everybody?
No, got a good. This is basically the application you use to develop the ad hoc Packer import.
Yes. Yeah.
Back to basically took unstructured data from the Packer file and turned it into a Excel or CSV to be imported into FBS. Is that?
Yep. So
figuring out the groups and how they've identified.
Yeah. So in that process, in that process, you could pull in, multiple, and I don't have that quickly available. You could pull in multiple kill sheets, and then in the end result, they would go through a mapping process to map it to the right group. Obviously, what I knew in Excel, I didn't know which group it would be tagged to, so that was a manual process. And then from there, it would create it created the import process into FBS. So it was, it's not a perfect process, but it's much more than, when the Packer interface changed, it was a quick way of resolving that problem. But not perfect by any means.
Yeah, so how many watching this would like to implement this or would consider doing that themselves in their operation? Anybody want? Trying to identify themselves, ready to. I'm a little slow about being able to put together a survey, but it would be.
Hey, Daryl, I got a question for you.
Sure.
So can you import table setups and measures into Power BI, or do you have to set all those up manually?
Well, you have to set them up manually, but what my goal is, my hope is, once you get a format in place, you can just copy that file into another file. Just give it a different name and then point it to a different source, and then everything should be there. So I don't envision, once you get this in place, I don't think it'd be that hard to repeat for another client. There's going to be some changes, some terminology changes, but I think the basic process should be fairly simple to replicate.
So I guess like at the MASA level, have you guys had the conversation of more or less being able to convert the FBS tables into DAX?
None of that discussion has taken place yet. But again, some of the next steps and the next discussion I have, I'm going to encourage creating foundational measures. I'm going to encourage setting up, the tables and relationships and the foundational measures to at least get people started in the right direction. Because once you get the foundational measures, everything else, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's at least you've got 80% of the building block in place, the foundation in place. I think that's something that MASA could eventually provide.
Yeah, because like if you could push out or if you could just push out kind of, the generic measures to
Exactly.
new users, that's going to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I'm assuming it's going through and setting up the coding when you're doing all those measures. That's where all the time consumption is.
Exactly. Just like Martin mentioned, was it yesterday, the day before, about containers, being able to create a container and installing it. That's what I would envision here, is setting up a foundation as a container that has everything in place. And then if people wanted to play with visuals, a different type of visual, go for it. But the measures and relationships would be in place. But as part of the product development, this has not really been talked about within the MASA group.
Gotcha. Thanks.
So Bob, I wouldn't even think about trying to do this within our own organization without Daryl's help. So, maybe it's the county groups out there that are gonna think about doing this for clients.
Yeah, because the most time-consuming part is just going through and doing all those measures and stuff. Because it looks pretty similar to SQL, but yeah, learning a programming language isn't really fun.
Yeah. The tough part is that data modeling component of it is getting your tables in place, right relationships, and your measures. Once you get that part done, it's just your creativity from there, getting your visuals and showing what you want, and quarterly or annual or by site, that's all individualized. But it's the foundation that I think as a group needs to be, worked on and help people get 80% of the way there out of the box. Okay, so next 15, 20 minutes, let's kind of talk about what are the next steps for yourself, for MASA, for me. Is this technology worth chasing? So when I got into this, year and a half ago, my goal is to develop a reporting system that I could bring to the table for 10 or 15 clients. Am I ready to implement with others? Hate to say it, but probably not quite there yet. You know, it's just like a spreadsheet. You have one spreadsheet. I want to make sure it's right before I start duplicating it and replicating it for others. So I'm still working on it. I'm into it. The other question I would have is, are the FBS/MASA data ready for this level of reporting? You know, I'm digging pretty deep into crop audit requirements. You know, the operations, miles and units and hours. That's driving a lot of it. A lot of the allocations, at least on the farming side. Are we ready for that level of reporting? Data ready for that level of reporting? Then I questioned, you know, what's the value of this type of reporting? Got some development time into it, and there's a lot more that needs to be done. What's the value behind it? And then how do I move forward? Do I find somebody to help me to make this more professional? Or do I kind of continue as a Lone Ranger? And I'll just say it, if I continue as a Lone Ranger, it's probably a slow go. But I think also, you know, from a Power BI perspective, yeah, we're doing a lot of neat things, but is that really what's needed? And Randy and Bob kind of alluded to that earlier. And as I've been part of the, you know, some of the discussions within MASA, we had a email exchange with Rabobank, and they've listed out a listing of a summary of items that they would want to see in an interface, an API interface. And I tried to summarize those best I could. And obviously, inventories, price, and quantity, you know, I think we could get to fixed asset. They also were asking for schedules, fixed asset schedules. And what I thought was interesting, they wanted to know market values and then a supporting schedule with cost and accumulated depreciation tied to them. And I agree with that, but that was the first time I'd seen that kind of information being requested from a bank. The other type of report they would like is a note payable schedule, which includes the name of the lender, the rate, you know, the maturity date, the annual payment, credit limit on LOCs, so on. So as I was looking, and then we've got the aging reports, obviously FBS could provide that. But as I look at it today, out of what Rabo was requesting, you know, there's only two items that I have checked that we would have available for Rabo today, at least from my perspective, from what they were requesting. If we could add to that list, you know, with some Excel integrations or maybe some tweaks in FBS, I think that we could get the loan report up to speed. Pretty simple with some tweaks. Borrowing base we could do with Excel. They was also asking for a market positions report. Probably could get that put together with Excel. But as I've worked with clients and people, you know, all we're doing, everything I've shown is historical in nature. And how much value does that really add? And I know Randy talked about it a day or two ago, and then I see it down here with Rabo, you know, some forecasting with variance reporting, and what I would call some true market positions report with, you know, hedging and your cash positions all in one. To me, that's going to take a lot of effort to get to the point where we could throw that data back at Rabo through an FBS API. But this area that I haven't read, to me, as I sit in meetings and visit with, you know, work with different clients, these are the questions, or at least down in here, these are the questions that that often come up. And I hate to say it, but these are probably my weakest links. And as I look forward, you know, should I be spending more time on, you know, some of the fun Power BI stuff, or should I start spending some time on probably what really adds value to the client? Again, this is, I want to say, be upfront, this is probably my weakest area, but that's and from my perspective, it's going to take a lot of effort to put together. And maybe others would disagree with me, but that's where I'm at in my level, my work.
But Daryl,
Yes.
we still have the Power BI up. Were you intending to have a PowerPoint
Yeah, I've got
slide?
I was hoping to have a slide. Yeah, you're not seeing it?
I'm still looking at the Power BI desktop.
What's everybody else seeing?
Power BI.
Oh, shoot.
Mhm.
Let me, I'm sorry, guys. Does that help?
There we go. Yeah. Ah, that's helpful. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So again, you know, this is what Robbo was asking for, and I just put in, you know, in the red box is where I need to spend more time in my world, in my CFO world. So I just throw that out as, you know, what should some of the next steps be? You know, working on Power BI or kind of moving into this area here. Let me get back to my slideshow.
And Daryl, like it seems to me like a lot of those things that you're looking at now, like it's all manage estimate information. Is that kind of what you're like? It's pretty much you need some sort of interface where its management can put in estimates.
Well,
estimates would automatically.
Yeah, it would be more than FBS. It would be more. It'd get outside the accounting world on some of the, you know, market values and you know, borrowing base. You know, they put different values on borrowing bases than what would come out of an accounting system. So it's a combination of, you know, outside non-FBS, non-accounting data.
Well, but the point is here that you can still use Power BI and with some Excel input into Excel and tie it into Power BI for forecasting reasons.
Correct. Mm-hmm. But to get to a point where Rabobank could download it from a API, you know, there's a lot of time and effort that needs to be put in.
I guess, have you guys done it, or have you guys done any work with pretty much using, like, pulling the historical data out of FBS and then overlaying your, like, forecasted management estimates?
Well, Bob, the example that I showed on that trucking entity would probably be the best example that I have. Is, yeah, we're pulling actuals in and then integrating that with you know, forecast for the next 4 or 5 months. That'd be the best example I have. But would it be something that Rabobank would understand or, you know, take? It would take, probably not. It'd probably take some education to make that work.
Yeah, because the last thing you'd want is a lender to go out and grab something before it's ready.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the danger you always seem to run into. People trying to grab stuff too quick.
So I just throw that out as, you know, kind of next steps. Let's move on for what I think next steps for MASA and FBS might be. Frankly, you know, just throwing an API option out for MASA users, I don't think is going to go very far. I think, again, we need to get to a point where we get the foundation in place, Power BI foundation or Tableau foundation, whatever BI tool we decide to go with. I think we need to get the foundation in place so people can take that foundation and run. So I think, you know, out of the MASA group needs to come up with some best practices for data model design, or maybe even create those for those users. I don't know what that would look like, but I think we need to do a little bit more than just throw out an API. I'd also encourage, you know, the MASA and FBS team, development team, to just learn more about these Power BI tools and the experiences. Some of the videos I've seen, you can embed these visuals that we see inside the FBS software. I could see that happening, eventually in the longer term. Ag World, they have what they call it apps. Again, I really don't know what that means, but it's an app is something you go to the Power BI store and download their app. FBS, MASA needs to be able to go to that store, Power BI store, and see that app available. Then, like I talked about, the automating a lot of processes, and Martin talked about this, I believe it was yesterday, of wanting to work with some of the power tools coming out of Microsoft that need FBS and power tools need to play together. Well, this would be an example that that we kind of got that thought process started on. All I guess I want to say is for everybody is, my eyes have been opened. There's just a lot of technology out there that I didn't know exists. I'm sure there's twice as much more that I don't know about. We just need to explore what those options are. Okay, in terms of some internal things inside of the FBS, it was a difficult process to take the existing FBS data and make sense of it. For example, the WIP process. The WIP centers are tough to deal with. And then as we get into, refreshes daily, we probably should have whipping process take place daily. And, as we all know, the whipping process is kind of a month end, at least adjustments to the balance sheet are at month end. Will users expect that those whipping adjustments to be daily? I would guess they would be now that we have the reporting capability to do daily. Same thing for the lower cost of market adjustments on the crop side. Those adjustments, those valuations are only correct on the end of the month. And again, as we go to daily reporting, probably should be pulling in daily prices in theory. And then down under allocations, we've talked about converting the S center percentage allocations to a cost driver based. Everything I've done is making that assumption. Is we're using cost drivers instead of percentages. That way we can come up with our cost per mile on our trucks. Then I'd like to see, and instead of maybe standard costing, if we can get into the forecasting side of things, and as we adjust the rates, or adjust the allocations every day, that we would look out into the future and being able to adjust our standard cost or our allocated cost by our year-to-date plus what we forecast it to be. I know that's a lot of work, but I really think that's the level that we need to get to for true decision making. The other concept I'll throw out is kind of a dual ledger. And if you guys recall back to some of those crop screens where I showed labor hours per crop or fuel gallons per crop, and then I was able to show that ledger that was associated with the indirect costs. Well, I did all that with the use of dual ledgers. So I had a primary ledger and then secondary ledgers, which would be the original ledger. And I'm doing all that inside Power BI. And, again, is that something that some of the adjustments that MASA might consider as they move forward in the Eclipse side of things? Then I talked about setup tables, just different, mainly just groupings and subheaders. That would be nice if that was all created inside, the FBS setup tables instead of having to do that in Excel. And then the last slide I think I have, Power BI, I'm seeing more and more of it. I know Ag World, as I mentioned, they've got their Power BI app out there. Family in South Dakota that I work with, I got them started on Power BI, and Nick is really doing a great job. Here's an example of some bull sales that, every month they monitor how many times they communicate with the customer, how many loads they haul out. There's just all kinds of neat stuff that they're being able to generate now and report back to the management, and they got an advisory board. They use some of these dashboards to report back to them. So they've come a long ways with Power BI. outside of FBS type data. And I know there's others working in it. I know Keiko's I've heard some rumors, Keiko's using Power BI, PigChamp, and I'm sure there's others. I just asked the question, does anybody else know of activity in this area, in this Power BI area?
No, I think what you mentioned is quite intriguing, how they're deploying it and embedding it and not trying to write their own routines.
Yeah. So I guess with that, I'm sure we're about out of time, but I just wanted to throw out what are the next steps for yourself as an organization, next steps for MASA, FBS, and then next steps for myself as I continue plow down this road. Open it up for discussions, comments, reaction.
Just to speak on behalf of MASA here a little bit, this is Blake. I think, our focus within MASA here initially is building the bridge, right? So we're building bridges in lots of different, we're building a bridge toward an API that's going to allow us to connect to a lot of different directions. Power BI is one of those. And it's a flexible, customizable, powerful one that I think we want to focus on as a group. And to the extent that we can collaborate together as users with common needs, I think these are absolutely, there's use cases that we need to work on collectively here. There also might be use cases that individual users or customers want to pursue on their own or develop on their own. And maybe they would grow that expertise in-house, or maybe they tap into it through somebody like you, Daryl, or somebody totally different. I know we've had a local technology firm that has helped us do some development work in the past, and I could see a case where we might work with them on a one-off basis to develop something as well, depending on whether the value is there to justify that. But every user can kind of decide that on their own. I think it's pretty exciting. I think Power BI is, you've shown us a great glimpse, Daryl, of kind of taking raw data and doing something with it and being able to leverage the energy once for, a long time into the future. So I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, Blake.
This Randy, I know there is some other entities that I'm aware of are using Power BI, and Daryl talked about needing help to polish things up a little bit. I've seen some pretty fancy stuff that's just pretty jaw-dropping. So the software allows you to do that. Good job.
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah, great work, Daryl. It's really exposed us and got us thinking. A lot to absorb too. But I think it's going to take a combination of planning and organization and foundations but it's helpful to know where you can go, and I think that will be and what some of the capabilities we can get off the shelf and what somebody has to learn. Somebody has to be there to help facilitate, because I don't think there's too many of us are going to develop a one-off solution. But it's nice to know that's possible. But if we can share resources again to get to a common goal, it'd be great.
Yeah, I just echo what Blake said too. There, we're talked to the MASA board about user groups that could work on some of these topics together. I think there's some real opportunity here.
Yeah, it's a big project, and as I've learned, it just seems to be growing every time I watch another video or learn something new. There's just so much out there available. I know it's beyond one person right now.
Well, thank you for taking on the Lewis and Clark expedition with us, Daryl. That's been quite interesting. I'll compliment you, and we look forward to exploring the next steps.